I remember days in the early days of Box where Aaron would come in to the sales office, like the sales floor, and he'd answer calls, right? He'd answer like the 1-800 like sales call, um, and it was fun. It was motivating for us because it was like this is like he's the CEO of the company. He just raised like X amount of $1 million, and he's still answering calls, and he's still in it with us. He's still in the boat. So it really energized us a ton too, knowing that he's still willing to get his hands dirty and help us where he can.
Welcome to Brick by Brick. I'm Rishi Taparia, co-founder of Gruder Ventures, and today I'm joined by my friend Justin Roberts. Justin has spent the last 20 years selling software across various organizations including Salesforce, Box, Lever, and SignalFX. He also advises and coaches founders, sales execs, and AEs on how to become better sellers. He and I first met 12 years ago when I was at Scale Venture Partners and he was early at Box. Scale was an early investor in Box, and we've become great friends ever since, and I'm excited to have him here today. Justin, thanks for joining.
Absolutely, Rishi. Good to see you again.
So before we jump into your time at startups, starting with Box, let's talk about your first job out of school at Salesforce, where you joined as, I think, on probation SDR, and subsequently got promoted every year for the 5 years you were there. What made you so successful at Salesforce?
Yeah, I think I was technically a junior SDR when I started. So for all the SDRs out there, there's a world. No, I was so fortunate to land a job at Salesforce as my first job out of college. Maybe just take a step back of how I got it. I went to UC Davis. I did the 4.25 plan. It's technically 2 quarters, but nobody's counting. And between my fourth year and my fifth year, I was in between apartments, and so I moved back home to the Bay Area for the summer, and I was looking at internships, and I ended up coming across one at NetSuite, and I didn't know what NetSuite was at the time. It was just seemed like a tech company in the Bay Area and fun, and ended up applying to it and got a sales internship for the summer. And I actually my manager at the time, her name is Nancy Kimmerer. She was running the SDR team at NetSuite. And it was a summer of basically just cold calling. NetSuite was trying to find QuickBooks customers across the US, these small businesses. So they had lists of small businesses that we would, as the interns, we would just call and try to find out what accounting solution they're using. Like, is it QuickBooks or Peachtree or Group Plains? There's a ton of them. And this is before Zoom Info and all the sales intelligence that we have now. And what NetSuite was going to do was a campaign, a marketing promotion to try to get those QuickBooks customers over to NetSuite. So fast forward, my senior year, Nancy actually went over to Salesforce to run and build out their SDR team. And when I graduated, she was obviously my first call, and I ended up interviewing for an SDR role and receiving a note back from the head of talent that said, hey, we're actually not hiring SDRs with no work experience. So I ended up getting rejected initially. And so what I had to do, so I went off and I was looking at other jobs and trying to find another company to join. And Nancy reached back out to me and said, hey, maybe a week or two later, and said, I've got some budget to do some contracting work. Would you be open to doing some sort of part-time work with us? I think it was like $10 an hour or whatever. And I jumped on it and I was like, Salesforce is somewhere I want to work. I remember at NetSuite, I was actually sitting with the enterprise sales team because they didn't have enough desks in the SDR group. And I heard these guys talking on the phone and their pitch and everything like that. And they were talking about Salesforce a lot. They were competing against Salesforce a lot in some of these early CRM deals. And so I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was a hot company at the time. And so I ended up taking this contractor role and did it for a month or two and ended up being able to now apply again for an SDR role. And that's what I did. And I ended up getting it, and, super fortunate that Nancy, put their neck out there and help me get a job in the Salesforce. And I think for what made me successful, I think I went into that role just still with a bit of a chip on my shoulder, wanting to prove myself. I had done this NetSuite SDR internship for the summer before, so I was really comfortable cold calling and understanding a new pitch and talking to people and understanding the problems. And those two months that I spent as a contractor at Salesforce, I was actually with the SDR team. So I got to hear how they pitched Salesforce, how they were learning it. I was working in Salesforce every single day, so I knew how the product worked. I knew what the SDRs had to do to convert leads and all that sort of thing. So I went into that role pretty prepped from a just from a basic skill standpoint, and I still had the kind of work ethic and grind from rowing in college and high school. And so I ended up figuring out a way to make it work in a system. And in that first SDR world, I was mapped to the East Coast team. They had now split in the East and the West. And I had a manager, his name is Dave Hershenson, who was awesome and fantastic and still a mentor of mine today. And so, we were supposed to get in the office at like 6:30. That's when the job started, and stay till 3:30. And, for me, I was back to living at home with my parents. My alarm clock went off at 4:42 a.m., just what it did in high school. And I got to the office at like 5:15 every morning. And, I had about an hour and a half of open lead, prospecting that I got to do before the rest of the SDR team came in. So when you think about like an hour a day more productivity times 5 days a week, that was 5 hours. And then I stayed longer than most people too. So, I had, in those first few months as I was ramping up, probably a good, 5 to 10 hours a week more of in-office work than most of the team. And so it really helped propel me into just be successful in an SDR role. Because at the end of the day, it was just a numbers game. Like I didn't have a better sales pitch, or I wasn't better at qualifying leads than really anybody else, but I had a lot more at-bats than anyone.
Well, I had the
really
chance to talk to Dave, and he and others called you kind of the quiet assassin, someone who just outworked everybody. And I think you used to have a poster on your wall that read, "It's hard to beat someone who never gives up." And so, you mentioned kind of crew and just a willingness to grind through and stay disciplined on a task, a goal. How much did rowing crew competitively influence how you think about sales in general?
Yeah, Dave actually gave me that sheet of paper. It was a quote from Babe Ruth. You can never. It's hard to be the person that never gives up. And I put it in my cube. And it stayed in my queue for probably 10 to 12 years. I brought it with me at different companies. And I had another one that I printed out. It was the rejection letter that I got from Salesforce the first time. And those were the two pieces of paper that I looked at every single morning when I came in, for a good 10 to 15 years. And for what it did to me is just it grounded me, and it, made me remember that nothing's given to you, and you have to kind of earn everything, especially in the sales world. You have to earn everything that you receive. So, the silent assassin, hopefully that's a good thing. No, but I think
it was definitely a compliment.
Yeah. No, I think what crew did is just it's a team sport, but it's also such an individual sport, right? For me, there's 8 of us in the boat, and you have to work together to, really make the thing move. But you also have to be very accountable for yourself. Like, you have to be in shape, and you have to continue to take care of like the little things that you need to do to make that boat as fast as possible. And so it's the same sort of thing in the sales world, where as an account executive, like, you own the deal, you own the relationship with the customer, but you also have a lot of support system with you, and you have to make sure that everyone is prepped and firing all cylinders. So when you do talk to a customer or a prospective customer, that you're representing yourself and the company and the brand that you're part of to the fullest extent. So so I think crew, it definitely was a great just preparation for me jumping into a sales career.
And so, you joined Salesforce in 2005, right after or shortly after their IPO. And as another colleague and friend of yours described, it was kind of like we were at the after party of a great celebration that was built out. How much of that was a motivator for you as you then thought about next steps in your career and going earlier stage?
Yeah, I didn't know. I was so fresh and so new to this world that I don't know if I necessarily, I knew that they were celebrating the year before a lot of going and IPOing, but I didn't know what it took in those early days, right? To me, it was just, hey, here's my role and here's the next role. And I was so focused on doing extremely well in my role so I can get to that next role. And Salesforce had such a strict track of you're in this group and then you go to this group and then you go to that group. And it was just this progression, this career progression. And so I was so like just focused on the next one and how I can do as well as I can in this current role that I'm in. But over that 5-year period, startups had started to come up, right? It wasn't anything near what it is today, but you started to see these new technology companies, and they were, seemed fun. They were having lunch and snacks and all that sort of thing, and it was, it seemed like they were just kind of on the up and up, but being at Salesforce, you didn't have a lot of exposure to it. And so, I was selling to them. My territory 1 year was San Francisco. And so I had sold like Splunk its first Salesforce licenses, and Eventbrite, and some of these, kind of up and coming companies that no one had ever heard of before. And they weren't definitely the brands that they are today. So, so it definitely piqued my interest, for sure.
And so how did you ultimately make the decision to join Box?
Yeah, it was, there's a few kind of, I'd say in my career, like big, tough decisions I've made as it results in like my career. And this was definitely one of the biggest ones of making the decision to leave Salesforce, because it was, I kind of built a brand there. It was all I ever knew. My parents just learned what it was, right? And so that took 5 years for them to, really understand what Salesforce did. But I was looking for something new, something fresh. I was probably a little bit burnt out too at the time, because I was working, I didn't just do the crazy grind as an SDR. I did it sort of all 5 years I was there. And I was looking for, I was probably a little bit burnt out, looking for something new, but also wanted to, make a big impact somewhere else. And I ended up finding Box. I think a friend of mine had told me I think a friend of mine had sold them their Salesforce licenses, and then Kenny Mendez, who was like the head of recruiting there, reached out to me, and I took a meeting just sort of blindly. I drove down to Palo Alto, and I was like, let me see what this is about. And I got to meet Aaron Levy, I got to meet Jim Herbold and Jerry Clarno, and some of the early sales execs there, and it just, something felt right. It was such a small company, and they were in this like crazy frat house in Palo Alto, but just something in my gut felt right. Like, hey, this is something that I feel like I'm really interested in, and I ended up taking the offer and taking the job.
Well, and you talk about going from a much bigger boat where you have many more people rowing, you have much more systems, much more process, much more tools. I've told you were very process oriented at Salesforce, creating dashboards for everything, tracking your progress. Now you go to a company that's, single digit millions in revenue, just now starting to go after the enterprise. What did you bring with you from Salesforce to Box that worked, and what didn't work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, one of the things that definitely was, I think, what made me really popular with the leadership at Box was, at that time at least, no company used Salesforce the product rather than Salesforce the company, right? So, my first few weeks, it was always like, how do you guys do this process, right? Like, how do you create like a lead flow into an opportunity, into like a deal, and how do you track things, and what sort, because at Salesforce, you always rate opportunity reports yourself, and then you create dashboards, sort of visualize those reports. And, it was everything I did as a salesperson, was the process was built into Salesforce for me. And so a lot of what I helped initially on that initial team was to build Salesforce and to build that kind of revenue machine into the sales process. And so that was really cool for me, because it was building. It was actually something that I could touch, and I had like fingerprints on it, especially in those early days. So hopefully, I don't know if that answers your question.
And so then talk to me about the carpool at Box. Why were you so protective about the email distribution list carpools at box.net.
Yeah, it was the carpool was a special group to me, has a special place in my heart. It was back then we were in the office 5 days a week, right? It was an in-office culture. And when I joined, I was living in the marina at the time. So I was doing a pretty long commute from the marina in San Francisco down to Palo Alto. And there were two guys who were also lived in the marina, Matt Norton and Andrew Smith, and they were commuting. They had already been at Box. They were there a little bit before me, and they were commuting down together. And I was making the drive by myself, and I ended up getting a friend of mine. His name's Dan Cutler, to join. He had come from EMC, and he and I were carpooling together. And then after about a month or so, we just, hey, maybe it makes sense for the four of us to team up. And we ended up carpooling together. And those, the memories I have from the hour we spent in the morning together and the hour in the afternoon, it was like the most productive thing that I could ever have done with my career, because, it was this, we were stuck in a car together for like an hour, and we would talk about deals, we would talk about product, we would talk about challenges that we're facing in the business, and we would all kind of help each other get unstuck with certain things we were doing. The email, like, we used to text each other. This is before Slack and all that, right? So we would text each other and say, hey, I'll pick you guys up at 6, or I have a late call, like, can we leave at 8 o'clock or whatever it might be. And so we ended up just creating a carpool email, and we would just email each other instead of text messaging. The fun stuff about it is, like, as Box grew and became larger, we would get these new hires that would join, and the carpool email, we had it set up to, we could view it all, but you couldn't join it. And so people would email and say, hey, I'm Sam and I just joined and I live in North Beach, and is there any carpool, so we would do some snarky remarks and stuff, and we made it fun. And, I think we were really protective, because at some point HR wanted to take the email and actually make it a full like carpool, and we use a lot of our political capital to keep it tight, with just the four of us. So
amazing. Well, yeah. And it sounds like that time together in sharing and trading of notes, solving of problems, was so critical to your early success and ongoing success at Box. I mean, you sold the first 6-figure deal in Box history. Can you share a bit about that sale?
Yeah, it was a great time. It was so when I joined Box, I was an individual contributor. I was an AE, and this one company was a big financial services company down in Los Angeles that I was working. And they were a full Microsoft shop. They were using SharePoint and all the associated products of Microsoft. And early in the days at Box, and you remember the marketing that we did, we went after SharePoint hard, and we had no business really going after it, but we were building the brand. And for us as salespeople, we were bought in on Box can go replace SharePoint. It could be a replacement for what you've been using for the last 10, 15 years of your career. And this company had found us. We had done the pilot. Things were being really successful, and they ended up choosing us and wanting to use us for a lot of the deficiencies that SharePoint had, mainly, sharing content outside their firewall. And we ended up doing a 6-figure deal. And I think, for all of us was, more so like closing the deal was fun. And, it was, the carpool definitely helped out. It was probably a topic of conversation, from me getting their help and input every step of the deal. But I think it was just validation for Box of like, hey, what the leadership had been telling us, that, hey, this thing can go replace SharePoint, like, was actually now reality. And I remember, like, engineers and the product team came up to me after. It was like, just so thrilled that stuff that they've been like working so hard on building, that a legit company, that would actually go spend this kind of money using it. And so it was just a great time for, I think, everybody at Box, and our CEO, Dan Levin, like, handed out $100 bills to like every single person in the company. So it was a lot of fun. But I think the most important thing is just, it was a big validation event for us.
Now, look, at every startup, there are these seminal moments where something that you never thought possible or has never been done before gets accomplished. I remember when I was at Point and we did the first live transaction on a brand new payment
Yeah.
terminal, or sold, Itaú in Brazil, on being a partner of a small startup. And, your six-figure deal was certainly one of those at Box. And, you talked a little bit about it, but what does the sale like that do for the mindset of a team? Not too long thereafter, you guys sold a seven-figure deal. And so, how
Yeah.
did that sale shift things in the minds of the team, not just in sales, but across the organization? And what was that feeling like?
Yeah. I probably equate it to, like runners, right? Like the first mile, right? The first guy that broke 4 minutes, right? And then it's 3:55 and then 3:50. It's one of those things that, like, okay, now it's possible. A six-figure deal is possible. And Dan, who was actually, part of the carpool, closed the first $1 million deal just a few months after that, right? So it just continued to, like, up the level of the game for the sales team, and we just got more and more confident, and knew that what we were doing was really meaningful and was impactful to a lot of businesses. And we, once you see one, that's possible, and then you just keep stepping your game up. And it definitely rose it helped with everything on the sales side, right? It helped recruit new AEs because now they can see that, like, okay, Box isn't just doing $5,000 and $10,000 transactions; they're doing actually legit, kind of deals. So you're getting better talent into the door as well. And I think it's helped across the team for everybody.
How much did the credibility of those types of sales, drive momentum in the business? That's an interesting point, of just being able to talk about that with potential hires, future customers. What was that acceleration like?
Yeah, it's everything. I think it's obviously, the ARR that comes from it is nice, but I think it's when you're recruiting, and when we were hiring, it's so fast back in those days too. This is like 2010, 11, 12. It attracts more talent, right? Because A players want to work with A players. And when you know that, hey, this is a company that's an A type of company, and they've got really successful leadership and really successful people across the org, it attracts that same talent. And so we were really able to, at least on the go-to-market side, to bring in some real talented leadership and really talented individual contributors, because they were seeing the success, and we can share with them the success that we've had over the last 6 to 12 months.
Makes sense. Switching gears a bit, I think in every seller's career, there's a chance. Do you continue to sell and go hunt down deals and sales and the commissions associated with that, and kind of continue down that path, or do you transition to being a manager? And oftentimes transitioning to managers actually means you're taking home less and no longer kind of controlling your own destiny, so to speak. You actively made the decision to transition into a more team management, managerial role. Why did you do that?
Yeah. So I mentioned, a couple real tough career decisions in my life. This is probably the second one. I was there for a year. I had done well. I had, closed a couple of these larger kind of transactions. And for myself, my sort of thought career aspect with Box was to go, really into the enterprise team and start to close larger and larger deals. We were growing so fast at the time, and Jim and Jerry Clarno needed some leadership management help because we were hiring so many people. And they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and asked if hey, people are sort of drawn to you, and they ask you a bunch of questions, and you seem to help out, right? Like, are you interested in the management role? And I wasn't even really considering it at the time, and had a real tough decision to make. To myself, for me, it was like, oh man, I got to do this now or I'm never going to do it, type of thing. Which looking back on it, isn't necessarily the case. And but I reached out to a ton of mentors and was really considering, like, what should I do in this situation. And as I sort of looked internally, I've always kind of been in leadership positions, for rowing, team captain and student president with the team council and stuff like that. And um, it was one of those things that, and I actually remember asking Aaron Levy. I found some time with him and asked him like, hey, what do you think about this? And he's like, hey, listen, if you can go make 8 people do $1 million a year versus you just doing $1 million a year, like you have my answer, right? So it was those sort of things that kind of just keep continuing to add up, and I ended up making the move into a management role, and got to work for Jerry Clarno, and learned a ton from him, and probably made a ton of mistakes, and but you kind of have to do it at some point in your career.
What was the biggest challenge after you made the decision to transition for you, and how did you navigate through that?
For me, there's a ton of challenges, right? Especially I was probably 28 years old, right? So the first challenge was there's AEs on my team who are older than me, and for me, it's like, what am I gonna? I've only been selling for a few years now. Like, what am I gonna say to them? So I think the confidence of being able to manage people who were older than me was a challenge that I had to kind of get over. And what made me successful as a salesperson isn't the same that makes everybody else successful. Like for me, it was always grind, right? If I was ever behind my number, needed to catch up, it was, I'm going to get in early and I'm going to stay late and I'm going to grind as hard as I can. And that's just not possible for a lot of people. And, we've talked about this, offline, like having kids and being the parent now, like it's a different, it's a different appreciation that like I didn't know back then in my 20s, right? Like how to do this as a parent and having other responsibilities at home. And so those are probably the biggest things is, how do I motivate people and how do I make them productive and successful and motivated, inspired to work for me, by not just like implementing my own work ethic on them, but trying to find what motivates them. Some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by recognition. Some people are motivated by other things. And I really had to figure out a way to go find that in people, have the trust, that they would share it with me to make the team productive.
And so you think about, you transition from Salesforce to Box doing single digit millions in revenue, and you scaled that up, saw it through the IPO. You think about then the next phase of your career, join Lever, sub-million in revenue, SignalFX, single digit millions in revenue, Flatfile, single digit millions in revenue. And as I think about that journey, Box IPO, Lever multi-$100 million acquisition, Signal $1 billion plus acquisition, Flatfile doing tens of millions in revenue now. You've obviously got the touch. And so, when you look at picking early stage companies to go join, what are some of the things you're sniffing around for in discussions with the team, with the execs, with the other sellers to say, yep, this is where I want to go next?
Yeah. I wish I had it on a silver platter that I can give advice. I think
if
a
you
lot
do,
of it
you
just
tell me that later.
Yeah, exactly. Right. A lot of it comes down to luck. I think you have to have a little bit of luck within this world to go do something. But at the heart of it, it's the team. And I think starting with the founders and having when I look at the founders and the executive team that I've worked for in the past, especially those early days, they're just in it and they're grinding and they're smart and they're connected and they know how to hire great people. And I think at every one of those stops, I've had great people that I've worked with, and no matter the challenges and the problems, because every one of them had problems, right? Like Box, we definitely had product issues back in the early days, and Lever, we had the same thing. And having functional heads who can figure out those challenges and go solve them. I think that's the biggest part. And, you bringing in the right talent to be able to go do that. I think the other thing too with, I talk about, the sort of luck on it. I was fortunate, with Box, we had the same go-to-market leadership team through the whole transition, right? Jim Hurble was there from the very beginning. He was there post 100 million in revenue to IPO. And what that does for the team, it creates stability for the team, right? And the leadership teams that he hired, Leslie Young and Jerry Clarno and Tom Addis, like they were there for a long period of time too. So they were, we had this consistency within our management chain. And I think one thing that I see a lot is, and you kind of start to, oh, I've got my VP of sales who's there from 0 to 10, and then I'm going to hire somebody else from 10 to 50, and they don't give them a shot, to go. If you got to 10, like you're not giving them a shot to maybe get to 50, and so maybe it's the right call. Maybe they're burnt out. Maybe you have to replace them, or maybe things happen. But I've seen it from both angles, right? What it does cascading down to the team is, a new leadership team comes in, they're going to bring their own kind of group as well. And it really stunts an organization. And so I think for founders out there, really think about as you're topping off your early leadership, make sure it's the right decision first. And, if it is the right decision, do it in a way where you can keep the talent that you have, because once you start to lose, those early employees that have the knowledge and they have just how to get things done at the organization, it sort of takes a turn. And so I was fortunate enough at all of those, right, to have a consistent leadership team. And you think about, I think about it too with sports, right? You see it all the time with coaches, and a new team isn't as great as the owners think they should be, and they fire the coach, and now you're in a rebuilding process for a certain amount of years, and but the ones who have Bill Belichick, right, a consistent coach, like, have success year over year over year. And so I think it's I was fortunate in my career to have that.
Well, and you talked a lot about already just being in the bullpen, grinding with colleagues, being in the carpool, and a lot of what you took from crew and doing things together led to success. Has remote work stunted an entire generation of sellers who don't have that benefit of being in the bullpen?
Yeah, I think so. Right. I've been on both sides of it. But as I go back to my early days, in my 20s, learning sales and learning how to do this job, I was so fortunate to be in a bullpen, in a cube, being able to mess up and have my boss on the other side. There's a lot of times, even as an SDR at Salesforce, I'd say things and maybe I'd say, oh, we don't do that, or we do that. And David Hirschson would pop up and be like, come over here. We actually, Salesforce can do that. And let me show you. And like right there in real time, he'd show me how they maybe create a report that pulls this data or whatever it might be. And so you just get like this instant learning and knowledge, right? Just feedback, right? And you just don't have that in the remote setting. And I think it is. I think there's a lot of benefits, and we didn't have the technology back then to allow us even to do remote. So now that the technology is there, and you can do your role from a remote setting, I think there's a lot that you just miss out on. And I think one thing I think about is just fun. It was fun to. It's tough to go into the office every single day and to, spend the hours, but at the end of the day, it was fun. It was, you really get to know people, you really get to bond with people, create a culture. And, companies even today that I'm talking to, they'll say they might be remote and, hey, we get together once a month or, a couple times a year as a company, but everyone sort of puts on the smile for that, that one period of time. Like, I think when you're in it together, you really get to understand and meet people, and you get to understand the good things and the bad things and what their challenges are and what they're, struggling with as a personal. And so, that bond is a lot tighter. And so I was really fortunate in I feel like I was fortunate in my early career to be in the office and get that instant feedback. And I think it's definitely missing in today's world.
And so given the reality of remote work, hybrid work, how might founders make a remote culture work for their sales teams?
Yeah, it's challenging. And I would say, especially for sales teams, there needs to be some sort of in-office togetherness, right? Whether it's, it's a lot more difficult when you've got a remote team, and for a lot of enterprise, companies selling to big enterprises, you're going to have field reps. And so, in that situation, trying to get them together as often as possible is great. But specifically for your early employees, like right out of college, less than 10 years of experience, if you can hire them in hubs, I think it's the best option. What we did at SignalFX was a very enterprise driven product. Like we were selling really big deals to large organizations. But we also, what I was responsible for was building out our commercial business. And so what we did in that situation is we built hubs. So we have a San Francisco office, we have a San Mateo office, we have a New York office, a London office. We're just getting Australia off the ground before we got acquired. And what we did was we hired SDRs and inside AEs and SEs like in those hubs. And so they were together, right? And we could fly in and we could do training and we could do things like that. But we had people centralized in one kind of metro area. That would be my advice, right? If you need broad coverage, like think about that hub model, because it just brings people together. And I think you just get, people learn, you just learn a lot faster when you're together with somebody. So
makes sense. And, on that same vein and learning and the systems that you're building, you and I have talked before about the sales tree and, salespeople being successful in the systems they grew up in. You've had the chance to work with some great leaders who you've pulled from and now have developed kind of the Justin system, but you can trace the lineage all the way up. Very similar as you alluded to earlier, athletes that coming out of football and the SEC as an example. How should founders, when they're thinking about what the right system is to build for their teams and their organizations, know what the right seeds to start with are?
Yeah, I think first of all, think about the product you're selling and think about the buyer of that product, right? Is it a technical buyer, right? Are you selling to CTOs and CIOs? Or are you selling to functional heads like a VP of sales or a head of marketing or customer success, something like that? And when you think about hiring, your first VP of marketing, your first VP of sales, like you really want somebody that has sold to that type of buyer, because it's a lot different. And I've sold both, right? I've sold the app side with Salesforce and Box and Lever, and I've sold more to the technical side with SignalFX and Splunk. And it's a much different process. It's a much different sale. And you have to have a sales team equipped to be able to either understand like the technical side of things or selling more on the app side. And so I would say first that, think about your ICP and then, think about the type of leader that you want, like in your organization. And you can find that through, VCs, you can find it through networks and really, really interview tough questions around like the type of leader that is going to come in, because they're going to create a culture and they're going to create a culture in a certain environment, right? So your head of marketing is going to create a culture, your head of sales is going to create a culture. And it's just a matter of like, what type of culture do you want? Like, do you want, we're going to pound the phones and we're going to grind and we're going to be tough. And, it's forecast calls are going to be, really deep inspecting of your pipeline, or, is it going to be a little bit different, a different type of environment, and you're going to have people attracted to either one. And so, I think that's the first thing of just thinking about internally of like what type of company you want to build and what type of culture. And, there's people that do both and they do both really well and successful. And we've seen both be successful. It's just a matter of like what, as a founder, like what type of environment you want.
Maybe at the risk of revealing some of your fellow sales brethren tactics, sellers can certainly sell themselves. And so what questions would you advise founders to ask sellers to maybe call BS on a couple of key areas around whether to ascertain whether you'll be successful or not?
Yeah, like you said, salespeople are good at selling and they can definitely sell themselves. I think a lot of it comes down to details, right? Like walk through a deal that you close with me and let's understand like how you found them, right? Was it an inbound lead or an outbound lead? Like who did you target? What kind of messaging did you send? Walk through the actual sales cycle. Like what were the challenges that this prospective customer had with their current product, and how did you map those challenges to the solution that you're selling? What kind of team did you have in place with you? The thing with larger organizations, you've got a lot of resources, right? So you've got product specialists and executives and sales engineers and lots of just different resources that you can bring. But when you're at a small company, you don't have that. A lot of it sits on your shoulders, right? So are you able to do, to really understand how to do everything by yourself, or maybe, pull in resources where you might need to? So thinking about that. And I think the other thing too is you alluded to it, is this coaching tree. Like, who did you work for in the past? And you get a sense, and I didn't really understand this until later in my career, but there really is coaching trees, right? If you came out of Salesforce in the early days, like there's there's a type of, like that I understand. Like, I know what type of training you got. I know what type of, sales cycles you went through, right? There's the PTC network, right? That we see a lot of these successful CROs that have come from PTC in the early days, and, they've coined like Medic, and, so you sort of understand that, like, hey, if you've worked for one of these PTC leaders, like, you're probably, really you have a good command of Medic, and you have a good command of qualifying and building pipeline and things like that. So, you can also trace the AE to the managers that they've had past, and probably understand a little bit about, what type of rep they're going to be, just from understanding that coaching tree, right? So I think that's a big thing to it. And I'd say the third is make them do some exercises, right? So give them some homework and see how they prepare, and see how they do it in a real life situation, because they can, a lot of people can talk and they can sell you, but let's see what you can do. If you have to put some slides together, or you have to show me a demo of a product, or some sort of homework exercise, I think is always a great thing.
One of the things that I've found with particularly non-go-to-market founders, CEOs, as they bring on their early sales team, is to say, okay, great, I've got my sellers here, I'm good, and I'm going to go back to focusing on product or focusing on engineering. And I actually think that that's a big mistake, because thus far in the journey, the founders been doing founder-led sales most likely, and have a deeper understanding of the product, of the customer, of the nuances of a market. What would you advise to founders as they're bringing on their early sales team, in terms of how to make them successful, and how long they should expect to be still part of sales before they can fully hand off to an early sales team?
Yeah, I'd say don't go away, right? Always be part of it. And not only because it helps you as a founder to really be at the core of what your customers and your prospective customers are saying, but it's motivating for the sales team as well. I remember days in the early days of Box where Aaron would come in to the sales office, like the sales floor, and he'd answer calls, right? He'd answer like the 1-800 like sales call. And it was fun. It was motivating for us, because like this is like, he's the CEO of the company. He's just raised like X amount of $1 million, and he's still answering calls, and he's still in it with us. He's still in the boat. So it really energized us a ton too, knowing that he's still willing to get his hands dirty and help us where he can. And nobody, I think even when you're a founder and you're doing the 0 to 1 or the 0 to 5 by yourself, and now you hire a VP of sales, nobody knows the product and the challenge better than you. Like, there's a reason you started this company. It's because like you found an area where things aren't working great in today's environment, and so you found a big challenge that you're now building a product to go solve. Most people haven't faced that challenge, and they don't know all the intricacies of the product as well as you do, because you're in all those different meetings and creating the strategy and the future of it. And so the more hands off you are, it doesn't help the company. It might make you feel better because you have less work to do, but it's not going to accelerate the sales team. So, it doesn't mean you have to like make all the decisions and be in the forecast calls and all that, but just still be present, still be available to join calls and join meetings and teach, because at the end of the day, it's all about like teaching and enabling the team to be successful.
For all the founders out there, don't wash your hands free of sales. It won't benefit you in the long term. Yeah. And maybe then for all the young sellers out there that are listening, what is one framework you think everyone should adopt, or at least master?
Yeah, Medic is is something that was brought to me later in my career. And yeah, at Salesforce we had different ways. It was more like a challenger sale. We had different ways, different sort of methodologies that we were using to qualify and work sales, like the sales pipeline. But when I was working for some ex-PTC leadership, and they really showed me Medic, and we went through pipeline calls and how to inspect deals using the Medic framework. I was a believer, almost immediately.
And maybe
And
for
it's
the
stuff that
audience who
like,
doesn't know, can you explain a little bit about what it is?
yeah, it's a framework that helps you qualify your deal, right? Do I have a deal or do I not have a deal? And it shows you the gaps, right? And so each MEDDICC, like each one stands for a certain stage in the process, right? So for instance, like like for the D's, the decision criteria and the decision process, or the C's, the champion, right? Do I have a champion in this deal? And as you go through and you're working with your reps on, talking through an opportunity that they're working, you help identify these gaps, right? So do we actually have a champion in this? Like, is this person the champion? Then we tested this person, right? Do we know who the economic buyer is? Have we talked to the economic buyer? And if we haven't, that's okay. But we know that, what makes us think that they're going to sign off on this $1 million deal when like nobody from our organization has talked to them? Like, do they even know this is happening, right? So it really helps you put a layer and a framework over your deal to just make sure you're not skipping steps or, anything like that. And so like I said, it was something that was introduced to me later in my career, but I've used it at every step of the way since then.
And so now, if you think about your evolution as a seller, and you alluded to it earlier, your dad to two great kids, and you've got a family life that you have to think about now and can't necessarily get in as early and stay as late. How have you had to adapt your approach to sales historically, kind of outwork everyone with family, and what's that been like?
Yeah, it's obviously, you being a new dad as well, family is so awesome, and it's great to see. It's just like so special to be able to watch your kids grow and see their experiences and the challenges and stuff that they overcome. It has created just another kind of ripple challenge in a career life, right? The work-life balance, am I giving enough to my job, and am I giving enough to my family and my kids? And, I think as every parent out there, you're constantly struggling with that. And, I think it's made me a better leader, because I feel like now I have this empathy that I didn't have before when I didn't have kids, right? I think when you don't have them, it's hard to kind of put yourself in the parent's shoes. And now that I've been there, it got a little bit more, empathy. I'm probably a little bit harder on the ones who don't have kids, because I'm like, you should be going, you should be grinding. But yeah, but it's been a challenge, like from a career standpoint, but it's also made me have to think about being more efficient with my time and making sure that the time that I'm dedicating to my company, like I'm doing what I need to do to get my job done. And that way I can, be at home after school and really spend the time with my family and my kids. And then, when they go to sleep, I can go back and start working again. So, you sort of break up your day a little bit more, but you're way more efficient with the time that you have, and you're more, you're more present. Like, I'm more present in my career, and I'm more present in my family life, because I know I've only got a certain amount of time for each one.
Completely agree with you. And it's amazing how many things fall below the line in terms of prioritization once family enters the mix. And so, look, let's talk about Revenue Pilot, which you recently started. Talk to me a bit about why you started it and who should be reaching out.
Yeah, excited. I mean, so I started my own personal company. Like you said, I've been through a lot of these startups. I feel like I've, created a playbook that, I arguably feel like it works. And I love to build, and I love to build companies and master sales, and, bring a product that's, just starting out into the masses. And felt like with Revenue Pilot, I could do it at scale. I could do it, not just with one company, but a lot of them, and get to work with founders who were just starting out in this career of theirs, like I did, 20 years ago. And so I'm excited to, work with companies and help them at all different stages, whether it be, really on the infancy stage, trying to go from 0 to 1 in revenue, or the ones maybe a little bit later where like now they have a sales team, but we got to make them more efficient. We have to really help them, build the foundation to go scale this thing out. And so, yeah, it's been a blast being able to do this.
Amazing. And last one from me, if you were given the choice between selling the number one product in the market, but having the number two team to lead, or having the number one team to lead and the number two product to sell, which would you pick and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a good question. For me, it 10 out of 10 times I would always pick the number one product to sell with the number two team to lead, because I've been in both situations. I've sold the best product and I've also sold the inferior product, and it's a lot easier as a salesperson to sell the best product. And I can go make a number two team a number one team. I have confidence in my ability to go do that. Not so much on the product side. Like, I'm not an engineer, so if it's a product that's not working, I have less influence to be able to go make that the number one. So yeah, I'd say when you've got the best product on the field, everything else is a lot easier to do.
Amazing. Justin, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. For anybody listening who's interested in chatting more with Justin, check out the show notes. Email address, contact information, website will all be there. Thanks again, and looking forward to catching up with you soon, Justin. Cheers.